Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Sophie Taylor, Head of EMEA Planning at Spectrum Brands. First of all, I apologise, I've only just got my voice back this week, so I'm hoping it stays, but if not, just bear with me for 1 second, please. So thank you for being here today. I know it's been a long day and hopefully everyone's found it as insightful as I have. There's been some great roundtables and great talks, so hopefully this one will deliver as well. Today I'm going to talk about something hopefully that's fairly practical and fairly relevant to most of us. How senior leaders can drive resilience and inclusion whilst bridging strategy to operational excellence in complex EMEA supply chains. What I'm going to walk through is a leadership framework which will help to convert strategy into measurable outcomes across service, cost, cash, and risk. So when I say bridging, I mean the weekly repeatable disciplines that create clarity, speed in cross-functional execution, and those behaviours and operational mechanisms that stop good strategies from stalling when those challenges come. Hopefully I'll show you not only the model, but what it looks like in the room, and what we can fundamentally change, hopefully starting from next week. We're going to move through 3 interconnecting levers: inclusive leadership as a measurable performance driver, strategy to execution as an operating spine, and resilience by design, a capability that you will build deliberately, not something that you hope just emerges. So first of all, let's anchor ourselves in the operations that we're working in today. Excuse me. Red Sea and Suez reroutes are still extending lead times by 7 to 14 days, driving up freight costs and giving us never-ending reliability problems. Those delays ripple straight through inventory, planning stability, and working capital. Panama Canal constraints are exposing climate corridor-driven risk. Unfortunately, I believe this is no longer just a blip. It is structural, and volatility is becoming a permanent feature of our operating landscape. And on to regulation. CSRD simplifications and EUDR deferrals are giving us some breathing space, but the direction is absolutely clear. Traceability, and transparency will be a baseline expectations. Those building data foundations now will be moving faster later, and most importantly, at a lower cost. So why are we starting here? Because variability exposes those key leadership gaps. When lead times shift or compliance expectations rise, the organisations that win are the ones that translate strategy into decisive action quickly. That's why we're talking about leadership problems and systems, not just the tools that are utilised. So why do those traditional leadership traits often fail? Traditional change effects often begin with tightening the process, which is great. I have nothing against processes. But processes don't make decisions, people do. Even the best workflows stall if decision rights are unclear, and leaders hesitate to take real trade-offs in the moment. Central strategies often break down in local execution because we don't translate them into what changes this week and what does that mean for inventory, channels, or supplier choices. And when functions and markets operate in silos, you get a lag and a noise exactly where you need fast cross-functional action, with more meetings and fewer decisions. The core questions that we need to be asking ourselves of, have we clarified who decides what and when? Are we operating from one demand and one supply picture? And do our forums trade off decisions, or are they just merely reporting sessions? So a quick show of hands. Have you seen decision wait time exceed execution time in the last quarter? So has it taken you longer to actually make a decision than physically put that into practice? Yeah, I think most of us have fallen into that boat. So a quick recap of what we're going to be covering today. First, inclusive leadership. Why it directly improves decision quality and escalation speed, and the behaviours that you need to be looking out for. Next, strategy to execution, how to build one shared plan, one cadence, and clear decision rights, so trade-offs happen in the room with the right people involved. And finally, resilience by design, the design choices that matter most over the next 2 quarters, and a simple 90-day plan to get traction immediately. So what is inclusive leadership and what does it look like in practice? Inclusion, when done well, fundamentally changes how and where decisions are made. We're going to start with psychological safety in decision making. When someone spots a demand anomaly or a capacity risk, our reaction needs not be, who missed this? Why am I only just hearing about it? And what is going on? But we need to know, what are our options and impacts? This shift reduces fear, increases foresight, and improves decision quality. I'm sure I'm not the only one who falls foul of this in high-pressure situations. Next, empowerment at the point of execution. Speed is a function of clarity. When guardrails are explicit, decisions can be taken from where information is richest, in the market, in the plant, in logistics, without bouncing everything back to head office. And finally, valuing local expertise. Market maturity, channel structure, and regulatory context vary widely across the European markets. Local knowledge isn't anecdotal, it is a strategic asset. When leaders draw on local insight, plans become more robust and more executable. So what fundamentally changes in practice? S&OE becomes a decision forum, not a reporting cycle. The S&OP narratives reflect local realities, and supplier conversations accelerate because the right information surfaces earlier. So when inclusion works, you will have 3 measurable outcomes which you will notice. First of all, decision quality. Track your forecast error and bias at the point of a decision. As more perspectives are integrated up front, both rework and bias will fall. Escalation speed. Define SLAs for exceptions and measure time to escalate and time to decision. When guardrails are clear and local empowerment increases, decisions will move faster with less variance. And innovation under pressure. Use a workaround registry. Count meaningful alternatives during disruption, substitutions, lane swaps, flexible MOQs, and track their impact. Having this to go back on in future situations will be gold dust when you're under pressure. And a couple of leadership micro habits which can help encourage this behaviour. Thank the messenger in public every single time. That really does go a long way. Ask, what would you do if you had to decide now? Most of the time, your gut might be right. And actually, once you've done a little bit of digging, it's probably the solution that you come back to. And close every agenda item with who decides, by what, by when, and how will we know when that is decided. So the EMEA market amplifies leadership gaps because of uneven market maturity, cultural differences, and the tension between global standards and local realities. The answer isn't uniformity, it is clarity on non-negotiables and configurables. Use mature market practices where capability exists. Simplify for developing markets. Standardise the decision packet, not the communication style. And publish what is fixed, policy and guardrails, versus flexible, buffers, lead times, and substitution rules. So by a quick show of hands, who currently runs a very succinct weekly S&OE process which is purely decision-driven? Well done. So cross-functional alignment is not more meetings. It is one rhythm, one picture, and trade-offs which are made live. When planning, manufacturing, logistics, commercial, and most importantly finance, operate from one shared demand and supply signal, latency collapses and conflicting truths will disappear. So what does that look like in reality? This is your decision supply chain. You begin with strategic intent, a one-page brief designing the customer promise, working capital position, capacity stance, and risk tolerance. This will then flow into your monthly S&OP alignment, converting strategy into executable scenario options with quantified service, cost, and cash impacts. Your weekly S&OE is the decision sprint, exception-driven, option-rich, and escalations only when guardrails are at risk. And frontline action, which I refer to as daily stand-ups, happen at the lowest component level, with learning captured and fed back so assumptions evolve with reality. Value is protected here through 4 principles: one source of truth, explicit guardrails, traceable decisions, and a living assumptions log. And here's how this runs in a monthly cycle. So as stated before, your monthly S&OP sets one demand and supply signal, chooses scenarios, and resets those guardrails using strategy and finance input. This is sometimes overlooked, and it's really important that S&OP is used to reset and realign everybody. Weekly S&OE resolves those key exceptions, critically, with finance in the room. Often finance are only present at the S&OP process cycle. However, it's important to get representative at S&OE as well, creating named decisions, clear owners, and most importantly, recorded impacts. And your daily stand-up meetings, managing operational exceptions in real time at the lowest component level, escalating only when necessary. Decision rights are explicit and applied consistently across every tier. Anchor the rhythm with a decision agenda, shared logs, and a one-page template which is clear for all. And probably most important of all, this is held together by North Star metrics, visible in every forum, used by all functions. So this is great, but clearly there is a strategy execution gap. And here are 3 predictable failure modes. When strategies are designed centrally and executed locally without translation. Local teams inherit the what, but not the why. Fix it by building explicit translation into S&OP and feeding weekly signals back into your assumptions. Misaligned priorities across functions. If commercial, supply, and finance have different scorecards, trade-offs become conflicts and blind spots. Have one shared scorecard and one integrated plan that everybody is bought into. And too many initiatives with unclear ownership. Portfolio overload diffuses effort. Fix it by capping your whip, assigning single owners, and linking progress to decision forums. With a spine in place of one cadence, one picture, clear decision rights, inclusion becomes a performance accelerator. So now taking a look at resilience by design. Resilience isn't a project. It is a set of deliberate design choices that pay back in service, cost, cash, and risk when conditions shift. And let's look at some key levers which we can utilise today. Your supplier ecosystem and transparency. Map beyond your Tier 1 suppliers to identify concentration risk at Tier 2 or critical subcomponent level. Quantify independent alternatives before you need them. The goal here isn't to explode your supplier base, but to de-risk the nodes which would cause outsized risk if disrupted. Inventory and flow. Right-size buffers by lead time, service criticality, not category averages. Corridor volatility and climate-exposed routes mean a risk-segmented approach beats the blanket policies which we're used to. This is where your weekly S&OE can dramatically adjust posture. You can buffer here, pull there, and move things around, whilst your S&OP resets the North Star monthly. Targeted digital and AI solutions. Deploy AI decision support and digital twins, where they shift decisions that you already make. Constraining allocation, dynamic safety stocks, transport mode switching. However, as mentioned in lots of talks today, it's important to note digital without redesign and training looks impressive, but it will not stick. Design the process and the capability in tandem with clear ownership and governance modelling. And regulatory readiness. Build your supplier data infrastructure and start supplier engagement now, not towards the end of the year. This isn't just compliance. It is the data backbone of traceability that customers and retailers will increasingly expect. The earlier you engage your suppliers in data capture, the lower the scramble costs will be later. So digital twins and where they can create value. AI is moving from innovation projects to core operational infrastructure because they help companies confront volatility with evidence-based scenario modelling. Where can they deliver value? On average, they can reduce cycle time by up to 25% through end-to-end process visibility and bottleneck prediction. Digital twins help leaders identify risk and relieve constraints before they become service failures. Energy and downtime savings can be realised up to 20% by testing production sequences, maintenance windows, and shift patterns before executing them. And cost savings of up to 30% through optimised flows, dynamic inventory policies, and more accurate scenario-driven decisions. If anyone would like to share, if you had to move one of these levers next week, which one would you pick? No? Let's keep those in mind, though, while we work through these next slide. So change fatigue is real, and leaders must carry the load. Even with regulatory simplification, climate risk and customer expectations and supplier scarcity will persist. Change must be led, not delegated. Leaders must link daily insights into monthly S&OP and deepen supplier partnerships around transparency, and empower regions to make rapid, well-guarded decisions. Change management is no longer optional, and consistency protects credibility. As leaders, we must anchor our decisions in those North Star metrics, explain trade-offs openly, and model scenario use. This will in turn build organisational confidence. This next slide simply summarises what we've covered into 6 practical actions for the next 90 days. Guarantee if you do these, you will feel the organisation get lighter and faster. First of all, focusing your portfolio. Freezing 15 to 20% of your capacity is often the difference between an operating model that breathes and one that chokes under change. Make the cut visible and publish the list of what's staying active and what is being paused, along with the criteria which we have used to make that decision. Publish your design rights. Release a one-page template for all of the meetings mentioned above. Who decides, who approves, who inputs, and what is the SLA for escalation? Speed follows clarity, and ambiguity is slow and expensive. S&OP to be the real trade-off forum. Reframe your weekly S&OE as the decision meeting, not a status call. Agenda by exceptions. Each item arrives with options, impacts, and a recommended course. Capture the decision, the trade-off, and the owner in the room. Mapping out your Tier 2 exposure on top value drivers. And resegment buffers by risk, surface criticality. Increasing buffers where lead time variability is highest, decrease where volatility is lower, and service exposure is limited. Once again, document the rationale and link to guardrails so reversals are rare. And launch an AI twin pilot. Scope small, prove your value fast, and then scale once that is agreed. Fund data readiness and governance and training in the pilot and not later. So as you reflect, consider where your organisation may sit on the strategy clarity versus executional readiness. If you're clear but stuck, invest in the operating spine. And if you're adrift, clarify priorities first. If you're in high performance, your job is to sustain and scale the loop that's working. So bringing this all together, the 3 levers, inclusion, alignment, and resilience, form a reinforcing system. Inclusive leadership enables alignment. Alignment empowers execution, and consistent execution builds resilience. And finally, resilience gives leaders the confidence to continue leading inclusively. So if there are only 3 takeaways from today, inclusion accelerates performance, not just engagement. Diverse, empowered teams surface risk earlier and make better, faster decisions. Strategy only matters if it's executable. Otherwise, it is merely an option, not a plan. And resilience is built, not inherited. It is the output of deliberate decision choices across suppliers, inventory, digital and regulatory readiness, reinforced by your leadership system. So just a final thought, 3 questions which you can take back to your team to hopefully drive some action. Where would you honestly place your organisation on strategy clarity versus executional readiness? Which resilient lever is most underinvested today, and where could you take the most from? And what would you change if your weekly S&OE was a true trade-off forum rather than a reporting call? If you get these right, if we connect people, strategy and execution, then volatility becomes a source of advantage and not just a risk. Thank you. Anyone have any questions? No?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much for the great presentation, Sophie. Secondly, you were talking around S&OE decision rights and finance as well. I was wondering if you could amplify that, because in our organisation we haven't got finance there, and I'd like to sort of learn from you as to what role they're playing there.
Yeah, so in our business, we run it slightly differently. If we have in our weekly S&OE meetings at a hub level, so although S&OP is at a top line level and there's one for all regions, our weekly S&OEs are done at a hub level. So there's 7 different S&OEs running independently at the levels that we plan at. So we have a local finance partner who attends those. They mainly just give insights around maybe different promotions that we might be doing, or if there are decisions that we need to make, how that might influence from a financial perspective. But that then gets rolled up into the S&OP meeting. So they're there more from an information or to help guide those decisions rather than giving any true real decision making in that session. However, we do call people in as well. So the finance lead is always on CC. So in case we do need them to come in, they'll get called ahead of time.
Sorry, thank you. Thanks, thank you. In terms of system, how mature is what system you're currently using in order to actually support that level of, let's say, execution of your processes? What system?
So I won't say that we're perfect. We're very far from perfect, but we use IBP for our forecasting. Our expectation is sales input into that as well. So we have separate lines for each of the different functions, so they can also input into that, which means we can then track variability throughout the different functions. So people can input different things, add the comments and make sure it's visible at every level. And then the snapshots are what we use and report on. So we can take snapshots at different lags as well. So if we're making a decision, we can change the lag where we do the snapshot, and we can track our bias and accuracy at that level as well.